Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast, where we help leaders build strong teams. Teams built on empathy, understanding, and trust, where every team member feels valued and contributes at the highest level possible.
Welcome to the StrongTeams.com podcast. My name is Steve Neesmith.
And I'm Rodney Cox.
And Rodney, our guests today are Jim and Christina Angelakos. Jim and Christina are a father-daughter team passionate about leadership and team building. In 2017, they co-founded LeadershipU, an online education platform to help organizations take their volunteer teams from good to great. They're also the authors of several books, the newest of which is titled VolU 101, Introduction to Volunteering. And last but not least, they're host of the LeadershipU Podcast. Jim and Christina, thank you for joining us today on the StrongTeams.com podcast.
Wow, thanks so much for having us, guys. We're so honored to be here.
It's our pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, and let me add my welcome as well, Jim and Christina. We're excited that you're here and can't wait for our listeners to spend some time with you. And we just got off of a broadcast where we recorded for your podcast over at LeadershipU, and we're excited to start our deepening our relationship with you guys. And so I always like to start kind of on a personal note, Jim and Christina. So what I'd like to do is just get our listeners or help our listeners understand more about you personally, you know, your family, your background, and then we'll talk a little bit more professionally from that point forward.
Ladies first.
Oh, I get to start. Okay. So, like Steve said, we are a father-daughter duo. And like you might have noticed from our last name, we have a Greek heritage. So we came from a big fat Greek family. And if you've seen the movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it is very similar to that. Our background, our family's all Greek. So we have lots of cousins. We're here located in the Orlando area in Orlando, Florida. And so we've been here for 20 plus years now, right, Baba?
In Orlando?
Yeah.
30.
Wow. Not so great with the numbers, but we've been here about 30 years. And we love the weather here. We were talking to Rodney a little bit earlier about it's a nice, bright, sunny here in Orlando today. So our family background is that we're Greek, and we come from Central Florida. So we've been here for a majority of my life and your life as well, I think.
Yeah. So we are family that lives here in Central Florida. We've been here 30 years. Mm-hmm. I'm married to Rebecca, 37 years, and 3 children, Mia, Christina, and Nicholas. And Nicholas is married, and we have 2 grandchildren.
Yeah, and they're so cute.
That's hysterical. So brief us on your professional journeys. Okay. How did you get the passion that you have now for volunteer and leadership and, specifically volunteers, but just your heart for leadership and how you got here professionally?
You want me to start again?
Of course. Ladies first.
So I'll kind of tell your story a little bit with mine. Growing up, my dad is a pastor at our church. And as I was getting ready for college, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I know I kind of had some entrepreneurial ideas and dreams, but I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with my life or even what to do in college. So I sought his advice, and he said, it's pretty safe to get a business degree. And so, okay, I'll do business. So I got my business degree from University of Florida, go Gators. And I just got the basic business degree there. And as I studied business, I thought, okay, I really like this, but I'm interested more in the leadership side of business. I'm interested to see how leaders and followers interact and how people can guide organizations to do some really big, super cool things. And so I kind of talked to my dad a little bit more. I was like, I'm really interested in leadership. And at the time, it was kind of a buzzy topic. And so I was looking at different programs to continue my studies, specifically with the leadership theme. And I ended up at Regent University going after a doctorate in strategic leadership. And so I studied, I got a master's there, and I finished my doctorate program in there. And when it was coming time for me to decide what I was going to do my doctoral project on, again, I went to my dad. And at the time I was working as his admin at the church. And I told him, I I have no idea what I want to do this thesis on. I have no idea what to really dig into. And at the time, he was the pastor over our volunteer team. And we come from a pretty large church. And so we had built up a volunteer team of several hundred volunteers. And he's like, you kind of have a nice beta group here to test. You can do some research and help us out at the same time. And so he said, what are your thoughts about leadership and volunteers? And I was like, well, that sounds as interesting to me as anything else. And so I did my doctoral process on taking volunteers into leadership roles. And so that's kind of where my heart for volunteers and leaders came in. So it's kind of just a practical journey from what was needed around us, what we saw that there wasn't a lot of information about or a lot of resources to support volunteerism and helping take volunteers into leadership roles. So for me, that was my start.
Yeah. And let me piggyback on that a little bit. So this is a daddy's observation with helping a daughter or a child decide what they want to do in life. And so, Rodney, you've got kids that are older, so you've already been through this, but there might be some people that are listening trying to figure this out. So the Bible is clear in Proverbs. It says, train up the child in the way they should go, and they will not depart. But basically help a child figure out the way they were designed and created to go and to do. And so with Christina, now the kids are all a little different. Christina thought she was academic. She was wired to do more studies. And so she thought, I really want to go on with college, but I don't know what to do. So we decided, all right, how about community college, associate's degree? And then while you figure that out, you get into the rhythm of studying and doing your academics. And then as you do that, ask the Lord, start praying. Speak to me. What is it that I like doing? Where's my passion? What's my direction? Does it end here or do I continue? And she began to go through that process. And I remember at the end of that second year, she said, I really like the business side. Mm-hmm. So we said, okay, good. That's a kind of a direction, a leaning. So she did her own research, found University of Florida. What was it? The
Warrington School of Business.
Yeah, the School of Business. Did her bachelor's program, felt still a call to do more academics, study more. And then she realized, I said, well, do you like the financial side, the numbers crunching, the CPA side, or do you like more of the leadership, more of the relational side? She goes, I like more of the human element. I like more of the relationship or leadership. So there's that bend showing clearly more. Now, 4 years ago, she didn't see it, but as we went along, she discovered the purpose that God had for her life. And so she decided on Regent, did the master's in leadership, and then along the way, she thought, I really want to go to the highest level I can academically in this field. So she pursued her doctorate degree. So for me, my desire has always been, I want to see people fulfill the calling that God has laid on their lives. And I believe that each one of us has this innate desire and this ability inside of us to be leaders. John Maxwell says a leader is someone that influences others. As believers, people of God, we have influence, not only in our own families, in the marketplace, wherever we're at. So I've always had this desire to work with people and help them discover what God's called them to be. And a lot of that is directional and helping them find purpose and leadership.
Yeah, no, that makes all the sense in the world. And I think about Christina and Jim, you guys leaning into volunteers. It's like volunteers are just absolutely the backbone of any church or ministry, but yet they're one of the most underrated resources that the church looks at, to be quite frank. Little time is spent developing volunteers and teams and especially the teams that they serve on. It's almost we need you and now go do it. And then, we really don't develop them or that tends to be what we tend to see. Do you guys see something different? Is that the reason why you stepped into this space? Why do you think that is? Why we spend so little energy really developing our volunteer teams?
That's great. You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so that was something that we noticed when you were doing volunteer leadership at our church. Then just in general with a lot of our pastor friends and different churches and nonprofits that we had been interacting with. And I think one of the biggest reasons that people don't spend a lot of time developing their teams or, spend a lot of time on that is because they just don't have the time. They feel overwhelmed. A lot of these nonprofits and churches are just trying to get ministry done, right? Like they have their task lists to get done. They have so much on their plate, so many of these pastors just wear so many different hats that it's hard to think of, okay, now I have to develop this volunteer team. So I think, at least from our perspective, we did notice that a lot of people would just be all focused on, hey, how do I recruit more volunteers or how do I get more people to help? And then once they're there, great, now go get the job done and kind of let them do that. So we noticed that there was a gap. And I think a lot of it has to do with just pastors or nonprofit organizations not having a lot of time on their hands and not maybe having the resources or the knowledge of how to help develop their teams or how to help them to grow as leaders and to invest time back into them. Yeah. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I would say that's right. And also the other side of this is I don't think in seminary or Bible schools we teach pastors how to value and build leadership teams or work with volunteers. To them, it's another asset or a resource.
Right.
But the reality is they're human beings and they feel called to the vision and mission of the church. They're showing up, they're being discipled, they're investing in the church, and they feel like, hey, I want to feel like I'm part of this. And a pastor or a leader, they never learned how to take care of that part of the people. To them, it's the sheep or the flock, and I need volunteers to bring more sheep into the church and to disciple more people. But to me, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm a pastor, pastors, if you're listening, all the volunteers, that's ripe fruit on the tree right there for you. You should be investing time in them. I think the big word is being intentional.
Right.
Coming up with an intentional plan over the course of several months or years to develop these kingdom builders into something more. And so I think a lot of times we just take for granted our volunteers and just think of them as something, a part of the church that's part of the ministry team. We clump them together, but we don't realize they're individual human beings that have great value to the kingdom.
Yeah, we tend to see as well that, if we're not careful, volunteers can't say one small but significant word in the English vocabulary. And that word is no. And so if we're not careful, what happens is we ask volunteers to do way too much, right? And we get them moving down a road and they do good work and we have good efficiency, let's say, and we're winning and we start putting process and system around what we're doing. And then we start asking for more and more and more. And they can't say no. They want to be faithful. And then they get burned out and we can't understand why or how that happens. So I think we really have to help leaders understand how to really manage and balance expectation and make sure that we're not taking too much and we're growing in measurable bounds and that we have the capacity and the resources to actually manage and sustain that. Versus just, hey, we've done that well, let's do more. Well, more might not be the best next thing, right? And so do y'all see a lot of that as well as in this, let's do more and volunteers really getting burned out and then they're expended or they become expendable?
Yeah, we see that a lot, especially your star performers. So we have these volunteers that are just stars. They're ready to serve. They're eager to serve. And like you said, they can't say no, or they don't want to tell, especially someone they love, their pastor, their leader, someone they respect. They don't want to say no. So they keep serving. And then, it is really sad because when you do see burnout from especially those star performers. They just kind of disappear. Like they're
Right.
out. Once they get burned out, it's really hard to bring them back in. And a lot of what we talk to with pastors and nonprofit leaders is making sure that they're investing in their team, just like checking in. Hey, how are you doing? Like, are you emotionally, spiritually healthy? Are you getting fed? Are you doing too much? Just making sure that that balance is there, because you're right. A lot of volunteers will just keep saying yes until they reach the point where they can't anymore. So that is a problem that we see frequently.
Yeah, and it can't all be about do, right? I mean, we have to take time to fellowship with one another. We have to take time to walk with one another and to spend relational time with each other, and so that we're healthy and our relational capital stays strong, so that we can have the energy that we need to actually pour ourselves out as an offering. And so I think those are real interesting things that leaders really, I think have to start thinking about, especially in the space of volunteers, especially coming out post-COVID, so we'll talk a little bit about post-COVID stuff here a little further down the road.
Yeah. Speaking of Jim and Christina, we've interviewed pastors on this podcast that have told us that volunteerism in their church has become a particularly big challenge for them since the pandemic. Is this something that you have seen or not? And if so, you have any advice for those pastors?
Sure. It's a reality. People are fearful. They're not coming back. Even if they're coming back, they're fearful of just fear. The world is putting a lot of negative news out there around us. And so even though we're in a healthy place to go, people are still fearful and not quick to commit. But I will say this, God's kingdom is bigger than the world's kingdom. And so I learned this a long time ago, and I believe this. Any size church I've talked to, it's a valid point. Everything you need to grow your ministry is in your harvest field. Mm-hmm. And Rodney, you've heard this, and I'm sure you too, Stephen. So basically, even a small church of 80 or 100 people, they glean the same star volunteers over and over. We go into the pandemic, the church drops to 30, 40 people. We're struggling to get back out. We're finally starting to ramp up now. We're starting to build up again. But here's the thing, where everything we need to grow is in our harvest field. Now, we look at our harvest field, which is in the church, but the harvest field is all around the church. There's thousands of people around every church that need to know about Jesus, that need to come into the kingdom. And so I encourage pastors, listen, switch gears a little bit. Don't try to keep using the same stuff over and over. Go out and start building the kingdom again. Start bringing people. Start visiting people in nursing homes. Start going out to the hospital. Start going out and visiting people, bringing the kingdom of God. Start bringing people back into the church. And as they come into the church, this is your new harvest field. Right. Start raising the expectation level. We want you to be part of discipleship. Part of that is serving. Mm-hmm. And so I realize that there are unique circumstances where it's very difficult in some areas to gain and recruit volunteers. But I think looking at it from an outside perspective, I believe that the Lord's kingdom is a little larger than what the world's kingdom is. And I think if pastors will pull back a little bit, maybe get around some other encouraging people that can give them some wisdom and some guidance and help lead them through the process, I do believe that they can restore their not only the numbers in the church, but also build their volunteer pool and also just begin to develop some more leaders.
It's great advice. I love the simplicity of that feedback, to get back to basics, to get out in the community, visit hospitals, develop relationships, good old fashioned relationship building, evangelism, never seems to fail. Many people think of volunteers as service providers, but you both have written about how volunteers and volunteer teams, they have the potential to lead. Can you talk with us a little bit about how to build a culture of leadership within a volunteer-driven organization? I don't think a lot of people think about leaders in that light. Volunteers in that light.
Yeah, so actually, when Rodney was on our podcast, we just kind of touched briefly on this too, about the idea of when you're a leader, kind of getting down in the trenches with your team and raising their commitment level by being there with them and letting people know, hey, I don't have expertise in this area. I need your help. I need your influence, your feedback. I want you to be a part of this. And so what we found too with our the different volunteer teams that we've worked with is that a lot of these volunteers come into, we'll use churches as an example just because it's an easy example, but say a volunteer comes into a church and they're serving in a role. Usually these volunteers have some really great, strong strengths that you might not even know about. Something we've had people working with us that are medical doctors, we've had lawyers, we've had all kinds of different backgrounds and experiences. And yes, they come and they serve and they do what they can for the organization. But after a while, a lot of them want more. They want to be involved more. They want to help more. And so as pastors and leaders at churches, it's awesome not only just to let them serve in that role, but you want to take them and help them grow along their journey and see what else they can do to stretch them and grow them. We worked with one lady, her name was Sheila. She's just so fantastic. She was doing our guest experience team, just working, visiting with guests and meeting them. And she would lay out cookies and coffee. And I said, Sheila, tell me a little bit about yourself. Let's talk. Let me know, like, what's your history? Because she had moved from New York a few years prior. And she said, well, I used to run the New York housing program. And I was like, you mean the entire, she's like, yeah, I, ran the program in New York. So I was like, okay, so you probably have some good training and leadership skills. And she said, yeah,
just a little bit.
Yeah, I've done, she's like, I've done some stuff. And I said, okay, so how can we use you? How can we tap into that? Share your knowledge with us. And so eventually we had her training new volunteers that came into the team and we elevated her into more of a leadership role within the volunteer team. And again, this is someone who's volunteering their time. She was retired at the time. So she would just do all of this, free of charge because she loved the church. She loved the vision. She loved connecting new members into the church and making them feel part of the community and home and family. And she just had all these giftings. And so that's just one example of really how you can, if you, like Rod, we were talking earlier, if you know your people's strengths, their weaknesses, you can help them grow and take them on a journey. Not everyone on your team is going to be cut out to lead the team because we need some followers in there as well. But there are people on your team that have really great strengths and you can raise up and grow with them and help them take charge and help just grow your ministry and expand to new kingdom building ventures with these awesome star team members that you have.
That was a great real world illustration and makes a sobering point. Hopefully I won't step on too many toes with my next statement. So what you're saying, Christina, is that you may have folks on your volunteer team that have more leadership experience than the pastor. And so get to know those volunteers. You might be surprised what other resources you have at your fingertips once you just get to know those volunteers and develop the relationship.
This is probably ties in. A lot of times as leaders, we feel maybe threatened by the folks that serve with us. Mm-hmm. We get to a place where we're like, boy, they got a better skill set than me, or they're more charismatic. At some point, you've got to say, no, I got to give it all up. I'm here for the Lord. I'm serving God's kingdom. I just happen to be, the Lord's using me in my position, whatever that position is. So I remember a pastor of a very large church came here in Central Florida. I heard him speak one day at a pastor's event, and that church was several thousand members. And he went to his mentor, who was a pastor in a denomination that had mostly smaller churches, 80 to 100 members per church. And he said, how come our churches are so small? And his mentor said, it's because our leaders are not, they're not comfortable releasing ministry to more than 80 or 100 people. It's about as many people as they can kind of control or oversee and manage. So he says, when I left that meeting, I vowed, or with the Lord, I said that, Lord, if I can only handle 80 to 100 people, let it be leaders of leaders.
Yeah.
And so for the next several years, all he did was, as people came in, he trained, equipped them, empowered them, and cut them loose to establish other ministries. And as soon as he started doing that, the church blew up. And started campuses all over the place. And I'll never forget that. That was probably 20 years ago that I heard that. And I realized that even myself, I may have a good skill set, but there's only so many people that I'm able to encourage, to live with, to talk to build up. So I'm going to balance that. I'm going to balance it with existing people that I can mentor that will become leaders of leaders of leaders. And then I'm always bringing new people into that process. And so rather than get stretched out and burned out, I'm always trying to keep a balance of developing new leaders for our ministries. And also, I think that's a good takeaway for pastors as they develop new leaders in their churches.
So when I hear you say that, a story comes to mind. I think it was my oldest daughter, and they were young, and we bought them some gerbils, and one of our daughters just could not let that gerbil go. I mean, just had to hold it all the time. And we kept saying, baby, like, if you keep holding that gerbil tight, like, you're going to smother it. It's going to die. And she's like, no, Daddy, I don't want it to run out. I want it to stay here, And so she couldn't loosen her hands up. And lo and behold, that gerbil died. And I'm like, and no matter how much we could say to her that if you want to, so here's the principle. If you want something to die, just constrain it. Just constrain it. And yet, as leaders, we think it's all about control, but great leadership's all about release. And the more we want to hold on to something, the more we want to frame something, fence something, the more control that we want, the less productive that you're going to be, and the less people are going to want to be productive with you. People were designed to flourish. They were designed to be released. They were designed to be free, especially believers. And the more that we constrain people, the less effective we are. And I think very, very few leaders really understand that. And I think you just illustrated that principle so importantly. You write in your book also about the importance of leadership relationships, and especially with volunteers, and how leaders sometimes don't take the time and energy to build those relationships. Can you talk about the strategic importance of nurturing those volunteer relationships?
Yeah, you want me to do that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I remember, and I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast, if you think back, who are the people that had the greatest positive impact in your life? And you will probably list some people that actually took some time and invested in you, and listened to you, and valued you, and mentored you, and were kind of were with you along the journey. So for me, that's always been kind of a critical, it's been a primary principle in my daily walk. I want to make sure that I am available. I have an open door policy at work. Obviously, there's times you have to close the door to do what you got to do, but open door policy. I mentor multiple people. I also tell them, listen, you have access to me whenever you want. As a pastor, you above and beyond that. But I want them to know that I am there for them as they're going through stuff. So there's 3 types of conversations that I usually do with leaders. I tell them, is this going to be a counseling conversation where we talk about something in your past, something we need to deal with? Is this a mentoring conversation where we're just going to talk and I'm just going to be there for you, sounding board? We're kind of going through life together. Or is this a coaching opportunity? Are you at a place where you're trying to kind of figure out maybe what's my next step, or what decision do I need to make? And the ones that I have better relationships with, they know that when they meet with me, they usually give me the answer. They usually talk to me right away. This is a coaching. This is a mentoring. So that, by the way, that cuts to the chase. That I'm a simple man. My mind's got to be single tracked. I'm able to talk to them. I'm able to invest, the empathy, the value, the time, and the energy I need into whatever they need to happen there. And so if they come to me and they've got all this jumble of all these different things, then I usually will say, listen, let's just take a pause. Let's sit back and say, okay, one of these things, which is the priority we need to handle today? And that kind of zones in. It kind of also gives focus to their mind. And I let them talk. And one of the important things is that every person, I've never met a person that doesn't like to talk, where you give them space to talk. They feel valued. Mm-hmm. And so spending time with leaders or potential leaders, usually it's not 80% me, it's usually 80% of them talking and me maybe 20, 30% dialoguing back and forth. So when they leave that time, I believe that they feel like that was really valuable for me, because I got a chance to talk and he could hear me, my heart, and my story.
Yeah. So I think about leaders that actually take the time once again to get to know their people is so important. And even like these 3 different terms that you're using, we would like to say the thing even with team meetings, right? This is a planning meeting. This is a problem solving meeting. This is an idea meeting, right? This is a brainstorming meeting. What kind of meeting is it? Because we can't do all 4. And if we try and do all 4, we're going to be miserable when we leave here. And not only miserable, we're probably going to feel like we just wasted a lot of time and really don't have anything tangible to speak for it. And so leaders setting that expectation, especially with volunteers, what is it that we're trying to do in this meeting? Why are we meeting? And well, we're just brainstorming. Okay. So we're not going to solve any problems, just brainstorming. Right. And so things like that, I think are really, or we're dreaming, whatever. And I think really, really important, So I think it'd be interesting, this is the strongteams.com podcast. So we'd be remiss if we didn't ask about how to build strong volunteer teams. And so, if it's the one thing that we've spoke about or we haven't spoke about yet, guys, what would that one thing be that you would coach leaders to do to start building a strong volunteer team?
Can we each have our own one thing?
Absolutely.
I wonder if ours are going to be the same.
First,
Sorry,
first.
I'm always thinking about
the doctor first. The doctor first. Yes.
So for me, I think if there was one thing that I would tell leaders to focus on to build a strong volunteer team, it would just be relationships. So relationship building. We always say this at Volunteer U, but people may come for your vision, but they're going to stay because the relationship's there. Right. And so when we're talking long-term, loyal, committed, faithful volunteers, some volunteers we've talked to have been with an organization 20 plus years. And I'll take one of your examples from you. I'm sorry. But my dad's been a part of a men's ministry for 30 years. Right. And he joined it because he was all for the vision. He loved what they were doing. They have a weekly Bible study that he jumped in on. And, 30 years ago, he started attending every Friday morning at, 6 a.m., super early, and then he started volunteering with them and helping set up for the Bible study. But what made him stay for those 30 years has been the relationships that he's built, not only with the leaders of the organization, but with the other men there. And you build community. And so whenever we're talking with leaders of volunteers, we always tell them, listen, at the core, it's all about relationships, relationship building. So people will come for your vision, but they're going to stay long-term with you because they build relationships with you and with the other members of your team. So that would be my one thing.
I think that's great. And I'll add to that, also valuing each person's voice at the table. Yeah. You've got to give time to every person to value their voice. So I've attended many, many meetings over the years, and planning meetings, strategy meetings, all kinds of meetings. And I think the meetings that really made me feel more loyal to the organization and more trusted and valued were the ones where they would give me even 2 minutes to pipe in. I know it's even a strategic planning meeting. You got 30 people in the room. Okay, figure out a way, at least go around and give people a voice, an option. They may not want to say anything, but just to give them that option. And to me, looking back, all the things I've done with large groups, smaller groups, giving people the opportunity, whether they say something or not, it's their choice, but giving them the opportunity makes them feel like they have a place at the table. Mm-hmm. It may not be a leadership position or decision-making position, but hey, I was invited to this meeting. I have a place at this table.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really important. Relationships is key. And part of that relationship building is allowing people the opportunity to voice their opinion or whatever they feel is on their heart during these meetings.
Yeah, so we deal a lot in the space of temperament, obviously, and that's kind of the core of how we bring things tangible. And we shared an example, and I'll share it with you here. Maybe it'll be healthy for our listeners. It's like I tend to, when I ask a question, I tend to want a response now. That's in my temperament.
Right.
And when somebody asks me a question, I tend to respond now because I expect everybody else to be like me. But God has designed us differently, and He's designed some temperaments that need a moment to think about it.
Yeah.
And so if I'm not careful as a leader, what I'll do when I ask that question and I don't know the people I'm leading very well, and they don't respond when I ask them a question, then I escalate my emotion. I say something like, obviously, you don't understand my sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And when I increase that emotion, okay, tell me what it does to the person that's receiving it. It pushes them further away from you.
Right.
And so the very thing that God gave you, a strength, can become a limitation when misunderstood and misapplied. And yet, as a great leader will understand, when I ask that question and I give you the time to think about it, then what you bring back to me is probably something I would have never thought of.
Yes.
And when I wait on that, we both have more.
Right.
And for that one example, I can share 4 others in that temperamental space. And the great leaders that don't understand that about the people they lead, especially volunteers, will feel shut out, misunderstood, and devalued, and they won't be part of the journey.
Right.
And leaders need to know the people they lead. It's critically important. And there's got to be an objective way for them to discover that, in a way in which honors everyone in the room. And everyone feels valued. Every person feels understood, and every person feels like they're making a meaningful contribution. It is so critical. And I'm so grateful you brought that point up. And I think our listeners will be incredibly blessed by that dialogue. We do our best to ask good, purposeful, and meaningful questions along the way. But, we always miss something that's so important to the person in which we're interviewing. So what I'd love to do is to kind of end with this question. Is there anything that I should have asked today, or Stephen should have asked, that we didn't, that you'd really like to talk about and think would be beneficial to our listeners?
I don't think so. I thought you asked super thoughtful questions.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. But I do have something I'd like to leave with you, if you're all right with this. It's the idea of being, as a leader, interruptible. It's such a massive concept, but we don't really think it through. If you look at the Bible, Jesus was interruptible. He was healing people, being interrupted constantly. A ruler comes to him and says, "My daughter's dying. Will you please come and heal her?" So he was interrupted while he was healing people. And then while he's going with this man to his house, a woman slips up behind him and grabs the hem of his garment and interrupts him again. And he doesn't get mad. He deals, he interacts with each person. So, when I looked at that years ago, I thought I need to be more interruptible. In fact, I got very convicted by the Lord to be more interruptible. And then, so I approached ministry in this way. Interruptible. If someone interrupts me, the right way would be, "Lord, what would you have me do? Holy Spirit, what do you want me to do with this interruption? Is it to encourage someone, listen to them? What would you have me do?" If I'm not in the spiritual realm, I may just be an interruption, and I look at it as it's neutral. It just happened. Okay, we were interrupted, so it's a neutral thing. And then the third part is the being in the flesh or the body. If I'm interrupted, if I start feeling like it was an inconvenience, or hey, wait a minute, I got other things to do, then I'm really I'm more in the flesh and not on the spiritual side or that neutral side. So I've been working this even more and more lately. I've been trying to teach it to our leaders to be interruptible. Christine, I think it's in the book there somewhere as well. But the idea of being biblically interruptible as a leader, I think is a massive opportunity that pastors and leaders have. And it's their choice. Mm-hmm. And just think of the value that you bring to someone if you allow them to interrupt you and you don't respond the wrong way, but you respond the right way. Building someone up, adding more air in their sail, encouraging them, or maybe just listening to some great feedback. Mm-hmm. But that for me would be just a closing out statement for me. I just thank you for the time, but I just been thinking about the entire conversation we've been going through today, and that just kept coming to my heart. So I just wanted to share that with you, Randy and Stephen, or Rodney and Stephen, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jim, what great words to end our time together today. Tell our listeners where they can find the VolU 101. VolU 101, I think, is the title of your book, Introduction to Volunteering. Where can they find that, and where can they learn more about you guys?
Yeah, thanks so much. So you can find out all about us at our website, which is www.volunteer.org. And we have links to our book. It's also available on Amazon and different retailers, so you can find us there. But the easiest way is to find us online at volunteeru.org.
That's great. Well, listen, thank you guys for spending time with us today, Christine and Jim. Our listeners, once again, are just going to be so blessed by the wisdom that you've shared. I do encourage anyone listening to the podcast today, not only to visit volunteeru.org, but pick up a copy of their books. Thank you guys for being with us today. I know you're busy.
Thank you, Rodney.
Thanks so much for having us.
Well, until we meet again, God bless.